Okay, so the movement that we should be making on the horse is exactly the same as we make on foot. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 time, as you know. And so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So as my left seat bone lowers, for instance, that would be the horse's left hind leg coming under on that side and the left shoulder coming back. And as my left seat bone's pushed up and forward when the horse's foot strikes the ground and pushes the back up underneath me, it will push my seat bone forward on that side too. And conversely on the other side. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when I look at everybody, you wouldn't believe how many different walks people do. And yeah, because look at Jade, you see, she's just doing that, hopping from one leg to the other. But I didn't see her walking like that when she came down to the school. And but it does make you think about what you're doing, even in walks. So if you find, when you're teaching your own students, if you find that they're doing all sorts of weird things, then, you know, walk is just, you know, if you're walking, if we're going for a little walk around the school in a minute, then you won't be doing any springing from side to side or hopping around, I hope. What I get people to do instead is just to think of lifting a heel and a knee and then putting it down again and lifting the other one. But even now I can see some of this going on, so which wouldn't happen in walk. You see, my head is completely still when I'm doing that. And I'm not moving my hips from side to side at all. It's just purely forwards and back and up and down. So that you're not then doing a Marilyn Monroe wiggle, which wouldn't suit Stuart very well. Yeah, that's all right. Oh, yeah. But no, that's what we're looking at. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now what I want you to do is try and stay as far as you can in camera shot. Just to walk around, put your hands on your hips so that you can actually feel as your hip rises up and forward and back and down. There shouldn't be any side-to-side movement like that, because you'll be collapsing a hip each time you're doing it. And just let yourself feel your hips moving left, up and back, right, up and back and forward and down. Yeah, and just walk ordinarily. Don't do anything sort of weird. I actually stood in Totnes High Street and watched people walking up the hill. I thought I was going to get arrested. But it's just, you know, everybody's hips move slightly differently.
So what's interesting, put the family beside your spine and play with the position of your pelvis. When
Yep.
it's neutral, you can actually feel.
And what I was about to say is also put your fingers, everybody, on the small of your back here, so you can actually feel the fact that it flexes a little bit as you walk, yeah? You put your fingers in the small of your back, Jade, here, yeah? So you can actually feel what your pelvis is doing, and that's why you've got a joint there, so you can actually walk at all, never mind ride a horse. Now, let's just halt again and think about what happens when you're told on a horse that you should tuck your tail under. Right, now try and walk. Oh, now come on, that's much too good. Tuck your tail under and you look like you haven't made it to the loo on time, yeah? But that's literally what they're making you do on a horse as well. I did this on my original old video with Leslie Bailey, who was the editor of Your Horse at the time, and honestly, she's really tall. How many takes we did on that, I'll not tell you. It was so funny. But you can see how ridiculous it looks, yeah? Now, on the other hand, if you're looking at, you know, what is technically the three-point seat, when you're talking about the two seat bones and the pubic arch being in contact, then you've got to hollow your back the opposite way. Now try and walk that way. And, yeah, and it makes it very difficult to bend my knees even, yeah? And so all of these deviations from the norm, it does actually hurt. And also it will stop you. Kelly's really, yeah, I wish my back was as supple as that, I can tell you. But yeah, and the same with Elsa actually. You've got a good you know, she should be able to absorb quite a big moving horse, even though she's not that tall. So, you know, it's having that flexibility in the back. But again, you've got to be careful that people aren't over-hollowing the back and creating too much of a lordosis. So it's all about, you know, keeping the spine neutral and the pelvis in neutral at the point. This is why I talk about a 2-point seat really in your actual position on a horse, because it's rotating from 2 points to 3 points back to 2 points. Very difficult to do it when you're not sitting on your seat bones, because the seat bones have to be used as a pivot to be able to do that. But it is still happening when you're doing that, when you're walking, running, or cantering, or skipping. Your back will flex in the same way as it will on a horse. So if, for instance, we want to do sitting trot, then the movement is the same as if I was running on foot. So, yeah, okay, it looks like we're all doing some sort of physical jerks now, doesn't it, really? So put your hands on your hips and feel that slight up and forward and back and down movement there. And then if you put your fingers on the small of your back there, you can really feel, it's like a little spring, or at least it should be, right there on the sacral. You need probably come a little bit lower there, Kelly, to feel it. Yeah, so it's there. So you feel like there's a couple of little nodules in your back. That's it, yeah. So just stop there a minute, yeah. So it's very nice piaffe, everybody. But think about it. I could put a complete beginner on a horse in piaffe, yeah, and they won't fall off because there's no real upward movement. You put the same person on a horse in extended trot and they'd be off after the first couple of strides. Because if you look at, for instance, some slowed down footage of an Olympic runner, you'll see just how much his back has to extend and straighten as he powers forward in the longest possible stride. His back will flex to its absolute nth degree. And then as the other leg comes level with it, it will straighten again. And as the other leg goes forward, it will hollow again in just the same way. So the back is used still as a shock absorber and to permit the pelvis to move in that way. So if you're in an extended trot, then your back is going to need to flex an awful lot more than it will in a piaffe or a very collected trot. So also in passage, if you've got a horse like Sudi who's got a very big, typically correct passage, which is much more up than forward, because there's an awful lot of upward movement, you've still got to let your back flex a long way to absorb the upward movement. But with the extended trot, it's got to flex a lot to absorb the forward movement, because obviously the body mass is moving much more forward and in a longer frame as well. And so, again, if you get the air time, so you're getting the actual joints flexing and you're getting the lift in the extension, it's not so difficult to sit to, so the horse is really working through its back. But if a horse is just running and flicking its toes, it's damn difficult to sit to. And it's because you're not getting the spring in the joints that is then taking the bigger step forward. It's a lot easier to sit to an extended trot on a really well-schooled horse that's really moving through its back and its joints. So that would be the sitting trot. But again, if you think about the driving seat in sitting trot, so you're doing both together like that. Now actually try and run like that. You can't. The only way you can do it is literally like a kangaroo hop. Sorry? Probably is, yeah, yeah. So, but you know, it's not quite what we want to do on a horse. And so, you know, again, it is if you get your students to feel this movement in the lower back here, so that you've actually got that flexion there, and if they're young enough and fit enough to be able to run around and extend, then they will feel the difference in how much their back actually flexes as they run faster with a longer stride. So have you got that all fairly well in your mind now? So we're coming from a neutral pelvis to start off with, as you would have in Pilates, for instance, or you know any good postural exercise program. But what you're doing there, Max, was to tip the pelvis backwards.
Yeah,
were you doing it deliberately?
Yeah. I was in Pilates, go back, forward, and then find your center.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, in Pilates, yeah. But the one thing we don't want people doing in riding is to tilt the pelvis backwards, because the only time we would ever tilt it even very slightly backwards is well, it's not even backwards. I'm just tucking my glutes a little bit more underneath me, in a halt when we've been really super collecting the horse. Because in collection, all we're doing is literally drawing up, 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 like that. But then sometimes the horse says, well, what's the difference between that and halting? And so you just very slightly tuck the pelvis under. It's no more than that. And they'll halt like that. And that's how super sensitive they become to your seat as well, which makes it all the more reason to try to be a bit more circumspect with what you're doing with your seat. Right, okay, so canter. Then the canter, of course, is the same movement in the saddle as we would make when we're skipping on foot. Because the canter is an asymmetric movement. It's not like a diagonal movement like the trot or a full-time movement like the walk. You've got the outside hind making the first step, then the inside hind and outside foreleg, then the inside foreleg. So it's an asymmetric movement. And it's the same if we skip on foot. It's this backward circle, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or ellipse like that. But it's not a push with the seat. It's up, back, down, because somebody on the e-group last night on Facebook was asking about how much weight there should be in the seat in canter. Well, on the simulator, when we had the pliance system as well, we set it up on there, the pliance pressure testing system. They used me as a benchmark, sort of to actually see, because I was supposed to be the good rider here, and they were astonished at my weight. There was almost nothing in the saddle in canter, because I'm drawing my pelvis up, back, down, up, back, down. You're technically lifting your skeleton by doing that, and it's leaving your seat muscles in contact, but you're also leaving then room for the horse's back to come up into your seat, because you're not pushing down against it. So you're drawing up, back, down, up, back, down. But you'll see a lot of people going the wrong way round in canter. And the interesting thing was there was a guy who's a BHSI and he's also a Tai Chi master. I knew him because he was the overseas sales director of a Walsall saddlery company. He said to me, he said, I've just had a little simulator made, Heather, in Korea. He said, I want to be able to take it out in the boot of the car. It's a canter one, he said, so I can do some Tai Chi stuff, sort of with my riders. We'll do some courses and things. So he said, it's really good. He said, but I'd like you to try it and just see what you think. So he came and plugged it in the simulator room. And I said, it's back to front, Terry. Literally, it took me 10 seconds. And he said, what do you mean it's back to front? I said, the movement's back to front. I've had 6 really good dressage riders on it. I said, I don't care if you've got the Queen of Sheba on it. I said, this is the wrong way round. And I could feel my pelvis being taken that way. And so I got off, rode it back to front. Oh, yeah, this is much better. And so, no, it can't be. So I got him to get on it again. He said, it feels fine to me. I said, well, that's worrying for a start. But then he got off and I made him sit on it back to front. Oh, Lord, you're right. And he had to send it back to Korea and have the innards put sort of back in it the other way round because it was completely taking his pelvis the wrong way. But again, you'd expect a dressage rider to be able to feel that something's taking their pelvis completely the opposite direction to the direction it should have been going. And so, for me, it's about simple analysis. It's not sort of going into all these, because I think what's happened with that film I was talking about that was on the Facebook group, what they've done, I know when they were trying to make a simulator for the RDA some years ago, and it was Brunel College doing it in Bristol. And they put sensors on the back of the horse and on the saddle, and they fed all the data into a computer and came up with what they thought was the horse in walk and trot. And it looked like, well, I had a sit on it, and it went like that, and then it went like that. And it looked like, so you can see perhaps where that film's coming from. Once you see it, you'll see what I mean. It looked like one of those washing machines that doesn't tangle the clothes, And they'd completely got the wrong idea of it because the data itself was flawed, because the thing is, if the way the horse's back is moving, if they've got sensors on its back end, its front end, and in the middle, it's going to feel very different to where the rider's sitting. If they'd just taken the sensors from the saddle, maybe it might have been better. But it was certainly not going to help any rider to learn to sit correctly on a horse. The same with these little iJoy machines that you get that, they're supposed to be home exercise, like horse movement simulators. They're nothing like a real horse. And again, I think they've probably fed all the wrong information into a computer and come up with that. But, you know, the simple truth is that what we do on the ground is as near as, damn it, what we should be doing on a horse. So you can actually, you know, if you can just talk your riders through that, so, you know, just say to them, this is the walk, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Trot is 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And canter is, off you go. Put your hands on your hips again and have a little skip. I think Laura's lame. She's going 4 time. It's 1, 2, 3. Come on, hop. Hop, folks. Hop, folks. That's it. Now put your hand in your fingers on the small of the back again. Oh, some nice flying changes going on there from Jade. Right, now feel what your back is doing. Put your hands in the small of your back. In the small of the back, Stuart. Yep. Yep. And you can feel how your back flexes and straightens. Can you feel that? Yeah, you need to put your fingers right in the small of your back again, Kelly, so that you can actually feel what the back is doing. You can have a rest if you're all knackered. It is quite warm in here. And that is, this, you know, what you need to, you know, because nobody really, yeah. You didn't expect to be doing this, did you? Just have a rest, folks, yeah. But that is what the back should be doing in canter. It's just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you'll see even now, when you see a lot of people say that the hand should do this in canter. Well, that's only if the horse is on its forehand, because its head and neck shouldn't be nodding like that. And when you're sitting correctly to the canter, if you watch my arms, you won't see the elbows opening and closing. They're not needing to open and close because the movement is being absorbed from here. The only time they're going to need to do that is if the upper body is rowing. And so you need to have, you know, completely stable seat in order to have your hands independent, or your seat is independent of the reins. So it's here. This is the movement, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so when you've got that, the elbows don't need to open and close. Now, Catherine is nearly there, and Tallulah, both of them. There's still a little bit of opening and closing of the elbow joints. But, you know, it's almost sort of allowing the horse to go on the forehand. It's not like you're trying to hold the front end in by keeping your hands still. It's just by allowing this, sucking up with the seat, up and back and down like that, then the elbows just don't need to move because the upper body doesn't need to move. But even somebody, you know, I've always been able to sit to the canter really well because I taught myself, you know, as I said, by watching cowboy films when I was a kid. But if I'm on a horse that's really on its forehand, even then I will start to have to roll my shoulders slightly just to keep my butt in the plate. So, you know, it really does make a difference when the horse is correctly schooled or it's, you know, got a good natural uphill canter. So, but it is one of the hardest things to do, to actually stop the rider rowing with the shoulders once they've learned to do it. You'll even see top riders doing it in dressage. You'll see the shoulders still rowing. And particularly you'll see a lot of the German riders that really do push with the seat, you know, still, they've still got that driving seat. And it's a real shame, you know, seeing that. In Portugal, you'll see generally the riders are much more upright in their seat, but a lot of them are still very hollow in the lower back. You will get this sort of, they talk about a proud upright position, but in the Portuguese saddles, you're pretty well locked in anyway, particularly if they're on the small side. And so, you know, you won't see the seat bouncing that much, and often they're much more comfortable to sit to. Put them on an average warm blood in the, you know, big trot like that, and you would soon see them bouncing. So, you know, it's again, it's all about how much or how little the horse is moving you. So what you're trying to do is synchronise, and that's a very essential word that we use, synchronise your movement with that of the horse. Because in that way, then, you're moving on exactly the same plane as his back. Neither any more or any less than he is. So, are there any questions about that at all? But it just, you know, it's sort of quite good fun as well for people, you know, because it sort of breaks, particularly with people if they're new to you and they're adults, you know, you don't have to make them feel silly, but at the same time, you know, because you can make them laugh, it just sort of makes them a little bit more relaxed as well, I think, too. And the other thing I think you've also got to concentrate on too is whether or not they're breathing. because you'd be surprised how many people concentrate so hard they hold their breath. And I know that I did when I got back into riding. I mean, I do think, you know, like Jenny Rolfe does all this breathing stuff and everything, and perhaps for me that's a little bit, you know, too much in depth. Or that obviously works for some people, but you know, you do have to be aware that if you are holding your breath, you can really make yourself much tighter, and you know, because you're holding against it. So really think about your breathing when you're on the horse too, and just natural breathing, and that sometimes will allow you then to move much more freely throughout your whole body. So it's quite important to remember to breathe properly too. It's funny, you get people on the simulator and they're concentrating so hard, and I'm sort of poking them in the back and saying, oh, you are allowed to breathe, you know. And of course then they start to laugh, and that completely relaxes them. And
the length of the spine,
yeah, it can. It's a good question, Maxine, actually, because it's funny, you'll find that some really short people with a very short waist actually are more wiggly than people who are really long and willowy, which you wouldn't expect. I've had one or two that were really, really, you know, exceptionally wiggly in the middle, almost completely, you know, sort of hyperflexed joints, and they're sometimes the more difficult to control. And this is where I would often use this body belt on the rider to stabilize the pelvis, because you need to have control of it, and this is why you need good strong muscles. Same with your legs as well. You know, if you've got weak flaccid muscles, you're never going to have controlled legs. So you need to have strong legs in order to control them, you know, not to crack your horse's rib cage, but strong legs will be controlled legs. And so, you know, anybody who's got really weak flaccid muscles is not going to have the tone and the poise on the horse. But the other thing we need to look at as well, and you can talk people through this on foot, is this business of turning. You saw how quickly Ray went through his outside shoulder with me this morning as soon as my weight went onto the outside seat bone. And it's not just my horses. All horses will do it because it's their natural inclination is to go where the weight goes. But, you know, when riders are taught to turn the body to the inside, what will invariably happen is that as they turn the body to the inside hand comes back, and you'll actually shorten the inside of your rib cage here, quite often collapsing like that. And so my outside hip now has gone forward, which is not where we want the outside hip to actually make a turn on a horse. You want your outside leg behind the girth. So when they do that, so you've already got the inside hand back, the outside hand's gone forward, the outside hip has gone forward, and what they then have to do is raise the heel to use the leg behind the girth from the knee rather than from the hip. So when I went to Desi Laurent for the first time, and he put me on this completely crazy horse on the lunge in his tiny indoor school, which was literally only 30 feet wide by 90 feet long, so it was just a communal garden barn, although you wouldn't have thought it when you walked in there, because it was just bizarre. You went right up to the top of one of the highest hills on Dartmoor, and you walked into this, well, you sort of didn't believe you were actually on the same planet, really, because it had plastered walls, and then he'd had a Dutch student came over who was a really good artist and had done beautiful black and white paintings of the drawings from de la Garinière, Duke of Newcastle's book. So you've got like all these down the side of the indoor school, a crystal chandelier either end, and here you are on top of Dartmoor, and you walk into this like, excuse me, am I awake or what? And then he puts me on this horse called Nimrod. I can understand why, actually. And you had no stirrups, no reins, and he used to use the decarpentry method of lunging, which actually goes like from the outside bit ring through, in his case, a piece of binder twine or baler twine on the D rings, and then back through the bit ring on that side. So you'd almost sort of got like a contact. So you hadn't got any stirrups, any reins or anything. And of course, you know, the horse just took off with me, literally, on the lunge. And it's like a 30 feet wide building. So the centrifugal force at that speed was quite excessive anyway. And the walls were concrete block. So I was not wanting to come off against those walls. And he kept saying, don't grip, in his Belgian accent. And I thought, well, if I don't grip, I'm going to fall off. But in the end, I think I was so exhausted, I stopped gripping, and the horse just came back to trot. And then he said, because I'd been taught, of course, BHS style, turn your shoulders to the inside. And of course, the more that you turned your shoulders to the inside on such a small circle, the more he wanted to go through his outside shoulder. And it was causing me to grip up like that and more. And I was very lucky that I didn't come off. And then he said, advance inside hip. I thought, what? Advance inside hip. And it felt very alien because I'd been so indoctrinated to turn the body to the inside. And in fact, when we were teaching BHS students, we used to have to actually read if they had a logo or a slogan on their sweatshirt, you had to be able to read that. That's how far round they wanted the body in those days. But Desi said, advance inside hip. And I thought, well, that brings my outside shoulder back. All of a sudden, I felt secure on the horse because he no longer wanted to drift through his outside shoulder. And I thought, when I actually went back to my parents here in the Totnes area, and I was thinking about it that night, I thought, well, actually, that makes so much sense because it's brought my outside hip back. So I can use my outside leg behind the girth from the hip down. But not only that, it deepened my inside knee and drew me up through this side of the body. I was then thinking, because he did eventually let me off the lunch and let me have the rein, he said to raise the inside hand slightly, outside hand lowered. And all of a sudden, I no longer had a horse going through its outside shoulder. And it made me think back to, because I had a working student back in Essex, and all the horses went particularly well for her. But could I get her to turn her body to the inside? She failed her AI twice because she was not turning her body the right way. And I remember going up to Malcolm Brown, who was List 1 dressage judge in Suffolk and chief examiner, and Malcolm and I spent 2 whole days trying to get her to turn her body to the inside. We finally succeeded, and all the horses who'd all gone so well for her started going through their outside shoulder, and I thought, what the heck's going on here? Because when she was doing it wrong, the horses were all doing it right. Once we got her doing it right, the horses all started doing it wrong. And I thought, what? Because she passed her exam, no problem at all. But ever after, we were having to get her to use more outside aids to stop the horse going through its outside shoulder. Then when I went down to Desi, I thought, oh, this is why Karen actually had the horses going far better when she wasn't turning the shoulders. And this is, of course, as soon as I went back, and I'd spent just a weekend at Desi's that time, and I went back home and I thought, oh God, we've got 28 horses and ponies here, of which probably 20 were big enough for me to actually get on. Some liveries, the rest were all school horses and ponies. Oh, I'm going to have to retrain all these horses now. Oh, every last horse responded like that to the aids. And it was like they said, oh, thank God she's learnt at last. And, when you get that sort of response, that's why I knew I was on the right track, because if the horse says, yeah, I understand what you're talking about, for me, that was all I ever needed. And then with Margaret Cox, it was her that taught me this aid of the seat as a restraining rather than a driving aid in downward transitions. What we were doing with Catherine yesterday afternoon, her face was a picture because, all of a sudden her horse stopped and she hadn't had to use any rein. She'd only squeezed her buttocks together, on the lower leg lightly. And the beauty of that is that you can graduate that aid, because when you'll often hear instructors will say, stop moving with the horse. Well, yeah. If you stop moving with the horse, it might affect a transition, but it won't necessarily be one that you could plan exactly. And when you saw those video of Hans Heinrich yesterday, when he was closing the stride down in the canter until the horse was almost completely on the spot, and then he just released his seat muscles and the horse bounded forward again. That's how subtle it becomes. But if he wanted to do, say, canter halt from that, he would use a strong squeeze of the seat like that, strong and quick, immediate, not a progressive one. But if he wanted then to do canter walk, he would have used slightly less, canter trot, slightly less. And that's how sensitive the horse can become to the weight aids and the seat aid if it's repeated often enough. But it is all about repetition. And that's what, you've got to actually just, when you're training a horse, it's all about repetition. But it's got to be the right repetition if they're going to learn the right things. You can teach a horse to do everything wrong, which most people do, and then they end up sort of coming to the likes of myself, or hopefully you lot, to put it right. But if they were all taught this way in the first place, they wouldn't have to put it right. It makes me cross because, the BHS is a welfare organisation. But to me, and I'm saying this on camera and that will go on to YouTube, I am still BHS education officer for this area. But I believe in working from within, and I do believe strongly that we need a good, strong equestrian federation in this country, or a national body. But at the same time, I've been saying it for the last 25 years, the whole teaching system needs to be reevaluated and renewed. And it just really still annoys me that we can do so much more to help people, and particularly help horses, if only people are taught to work with, not against the horse. And, pull to stop, kick to go. As I've said before, and this is something you need to get across to your students from the first time you ever teach them, that a horse is a living, sentient being, and that they're not there just to kick and thump and whatever. Because when you kick the horse, if you actually you can get them to thump their own rib cage, yeah? And what I do at lecture demonstrations, and they go, and I say, that's not a thump, kick it the way you'd kick a horse. And you hear, a groan go up, literally. And I'll say, right, now do it again and monitor your own body's reaction to what you're doing. Oh, my rib cage goes all stiff, my back goes all stiff. Well, what do you think a horse does? And you want him to move forward? If his rib cage is stopped from working, then he can't physically move forward, because he has to allow his rib cage to swing for his hind legs to be able to step under the body. So all the time they're kicking the horse, and even worse, if they're pushing with the seat, that is something that you will see in so many riding schools, and many riders who will come to you. That is one of the biggest causes of the horse not going forward, if they try to push with the seat to get it to go, because what they're doing essentially is tightening the seat muscles and using the aid to stop, at the same time as then kicking the horse, which is stopping his hind legs from coming under. So they then resort to the whip, and eventually the horse will move forward from the whip. But if you read my book, you'll see there was I did a lecture demo up at Wales and West a few years ago, and it was a sort of try a saddle evening as well. They wanted to, it was a riding club. And this lady came in on this horse, and she was kicking and thumping and pushing with her seat, and he was just creeping along like this. And I asked her how long she'd had him. She said, 3 years. He came from the riding school. I learnt to ride on him at the riding school. So you haven't really ridden any other horses? No. No, but I bought him because he was really safe. And here she is, about the colour of Stuart's shirt. And, and I said, right, okay. She wanted to try the saddle because hers was very tight anyway. Then I showed her how to use the legs with the swing of the belly in the walk. And he went, oh. And she said, what's he doing? I said, he's walking. And she said, no, this must be some other pace. And I said, no, this is not some other pace. He's walking. You've never, ever felt him walk properly. And she said, you mean I've been stopping him from walking all this time? Why has nobody told me? And how many people are there out there like that who are actually completely blocking their horse without realising? I think some don't care, but there are a lot out there who do want to learn. And if you can just teach them to use all their body correctly in sync with the horse, then it will make a huge difference to your achievement apart from anything else. Because, just teaching Catherine yesterday afternoon and seeing the difference in that hour. I've been teaching for 45 years and I still get a thrill from that. The day I lose that will be the day I give up teaching, because you just see how much the horse appreciated it. But then you see the beam on her face, and, here she is. Oh, did she? Oh. Oh, how nice. But you see, that's what and her mum, her face was a light in there watching her, because she's seen her daughter come through all this to medium level dressage, and she's still not riding the way that she could yesterday afternoon after an hour of being taught correctly. It just doesn't make sense, and it makes me so angry that they won't still take it on board to listen to what we're saying, because it's just simple biomechanics and working with, not against the horse. So again, in your as you start to teach your riders, obviously one of the biggest problems you're going to come up against is this gripping up and back with the lower leg. So as we said yesterday, get yourself just like a £3.50 physio ball, or just a gym ball from Tesco's or what have you. You don't need a physio ball like the one I've got, the peanut ball. And just get them, so it's one of the ones about this big, and just get them to put it between the calves and just close, release, close, release, close, release. So they get the idea of actually closing the leg like that, not squeezing up and back like that with the lower leg, which is what most people interpret it as, yeah? And so it's just close, release, close, release. So in walk, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're just closing the leg as each hind leg comes under, because as the belly's swinging away, the hind leg is being drawn under, which is the only time, of course, that you can further engage a hind leg. Now, in trot, people say, well, don't you do it the same in trot? No, because later on we want to use the legs separately for passage. So normally in trot it would be 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, like that. But as we said yesterday, the horse needs to be in front of the leg, i.e. he reacts now, not 5 seconds later. And once you've got the horse in front of the leg, you shouldn't have to keep nagging him to keep going. You'd only use it if you feel the pace slackening off a little bit or what have you. In canter, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you're doing all that, again, working with the horse. And you're not going to stop the swing of the belly. If you're closing and then immediately releasing, it won't actually prevent the trajectory of the rib cage. Now, yeah, both legs of the canter, and the same for trot. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Canter, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. Now, if somebody is using their legs when the belly is swinging towards, it's going to stop the trajectory of the rib cage. So the rib cage then can't swing to its fullest degree, so it will actually shorten the stride. Now, very much later on, again, we might use that in passage to get the shorter stride, but you won't be doing that at this level. So try to stop the rider using the leg when the belly's swinging towards, because it's literally blocking the rib cage and shortening the stride. So for most people, it's more logical, and they tend to do it more naturally with the swing of the belly. But if the legs are coming off a lot and they're just clumping the legs on like that, then they're still going to stop the trajectory of the rib cage. So even if it means staying as much as possible in walk for the second lesson, third lesson, or what have you, just get them used to the feel of the belly swinging and teach them, you know, to feel which hind leg's coming under, which hind leg's striking the ground, when the shoulder's coming back and when the shoulder's going forward, so that they can start to get that in their brain. Don't try and do diagonals and things like that with them to start off with. Just let them get the basic walk, feel of the walk. And the one time they really will feel it too is when they're going down a hill. If they're out hacking, tell them the time you'll feel it the most, the horse's back dipping underneath them, is as they go down a hill. It's very much more pronounced. So if they don't get it at the time, you know, just it depends. If you're in flat East Anglia, it might be more difficult. But if you're in an area which is hilly and that's where they're hacking, they will be much more aware of that movement as the horse goes down a hill. Most people can feel it, but you will get the odd person who's actually a bit insensitive in the rear end department. And sometimes it's easier, particularly in a school, just get them to put their hands on their thighs. And if they are moving correctly with the horse, they will feel the thigh dropping up and down like that individually. If both are going together, then they're going to be pushing with the seat. Same in sitting trot. So we'll have a look at that on the simulator later anyway. But getting back to just talking about the aids, when we walk on foot, as I said yesterday, the first thing that goes forward is your left foot. If I'm going to turn left, I'm going to look hopefully in the direction slightly in which I'm going. I'm not going to turn my head like an owl, which is what a lot of instructors get you to do. For instance, when you go to look up the centre line, they have you looking by the time you get to the quarter marker. And the head's a heavy object, don't forget. So you can actually end up with the horse coming off the track if the rider's turning the head too much or tipping it to one side. So if I'm going to turn off here on foot, I'm not going to think, oh, I must bring my outside shoulder round and come off the track like that. All I'm going to do, I probably won't think about the way I'm doing it, but if I do stop and think about it, if I go to turn off the track, first thing that will go forward is my left foot, left leg, left hip. But I won't then think I must bring my outside shoulder round. So all we're asking people to do on the horse is, again, the same as we do on foot. So if I want to turn to the right here, first thing that will go forward will be my right leg, right foot, right leg. I won't think, if I want to turn to the right, to bring my body round like that. So, you know, really what they're teaching on a horse is actually not what we do on foot half the time. But it is exactly the same movement as we make on foot if you're doing it correctly. And you saw how easily my horses turn left or right, and I can guarantee that if I got on any of the ones that come here this week, they will all do it on a loose rein with me, and they've probably never ever done it in their lives before. So that for me is one of the most important things to get into people's minds, that they're not to turn the body to the inside, because it has this effect of pulling back with the inside rein and giving the outside rein forward as well. Are there any questions about this at all while you're thinking about it? Does it all seem fairly clear now? Yeah. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that we should cover on foot. I think later, as I said, it depends if somebody does come this afternoon with a horse, but don't let me forget to do the one with the stuff with the reins as well. And so that's, I want you to hold the bit and the pair of reins so you can get an idea, and again, give your clients an idea of the contact with the bit. It'd be a lot less than most of those probably be used to, unfortunately. I don't, at this stage, as I said, I'm not going to go into all the stuff with the lateral work and things like that, because that's not something you're concentrating on at level 1. But it's very important that the rider is, A, sitting square. If they're sitting to one side or the other, they're never going to be able to actually get the horse to go straight. But one of the other problems you will have with some of them will be their saddles are asymmetric. So, and that then is much more difficult to counteract. So, again, it's very difficult because you don't want to feel like a saddle salesman. But at the same time, you know, you've sometimes just got to try and adjust it as best you can to get the rider. But if you feel that they're open to it, or they ask to try, if you've got one of my saddles, you can always, you know, let them have a try on it so they can feel at least what it should feel like. And sometimes it gives it a better idea in their mind of how they should be sitting and riding when they go back into their own saddle. So, but no, any other questions at all? Does it all seem fairly straightforward? But, you know, it's...
Sitting very straight. If you have people, majority of the riders that I teach are disabled.
Yes.
So if you have people that have asymmetrical bodies,
It is more difficult.
fairly straight spine,
Yeah.
it should still be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've taught quite a lot of people with various different abilities, as my friend Clive Milken calls it, over the years. And again, you've just got to think outside the box. I had a lady who came over from Switzerland years ago. This is when we had the horses, you know, real horses for courses before the simulators. And she'd had polio, and her foot was forever going through the stirrup, her right foot, because she was much weaker on that right leg. And so it was long before we had like cage stirrups and things like that. But they had started to bring those stirrup daps, they called them, out, you know, like a rubber thing you put on the front of a stirrup to stop the foot slipping through. But at the time, all I could think of was gaffer tape. So I got some gaffer tape and then sort of got some dust off the school floor and sort of dusted it off so that it didn't stick to her foot. And the difference it made, because the foot was no longer shooting through like that, and so it kept her much more level. Likewise, we had a gentleman that came over from Guernsey, and he arrived in a beautiful red Jaguar XJS, and I was thinking, whoa, what we got here? And then the poor guy gets out on 2 sticks like this, and he was 59, and apparently had been born with no hip joints. And he and his wife had actually won ballroom dancing competitions, can you believe? Even though he had no hip joints. But as he got older, apparently he started to seize up a lot more, and they tried to insert artificial hip joints and actually made him much worse. And he'd got a big Highland pony at home, like about 15 hands, so he's quite a stocky big guy. But his right leg was very withered, and his left leg was really muscular. Whereas he'd obviously been compensating for it for a lot. And so he couldn't get his right leg against the horse at all. I'd got a nice big show cob who would carry him at the time, very well schooled as well. And so I said to him, have you got any half chaps or anything? So he said, well, yeah, actually, I have got a pair. He said, I've got them with me. He said, but I don't wear them because one fits one leg and it doesn't fit the other at all. So I thought about it, and I'd got some sheets of my seat bone saver foam in the barn. So I went and cut a lump of that off, put it round his leg with parcel tape or gaffer tape or something or other, which then made his chap fit. But not only that, he could then get his leg into contact with the horse's side. So I sent him back to Guernsey, from whence he came, with the foam, and he had a shoe mender on the island build it into his chap. His muscle then started to rebuild. The atrophy started to rebuild because he could start to use the leg properly. He never got quite to the size of the other one. But again, if you can start to think like that with anybody who's got a disability, it works really well. And so, it depends on what the disabilities are. But, if you can try to think your way out of it, obviously if somebody's got a very badly fused spine, it's much more difficult because it really does make it much more difficult for them to compensate. You might have to let them, bring the movement through the head and neck a little bit more, which is not ideal, but you've got to deal with what you've got in front of you. So, okay, and so any questions? Nobody's got any? Gosh, I'll bet you'll all think of them later. Yes, Heather?
Can I just ask about the continuous, when you clench your butt up for that transition, it's in the, so going from walk forward to hold, it's continuous?
No, it would be again a quick, if you want a progressive transition, it would be continuous. If you want an immediate transition, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, halt, then it's quick, close. If you wanted to go, perhaps with a younger horse or something, you didn't want to make it quite so abrupt, it would be, you're looking for 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, halt. Then it would be more progressive. But in general, I want them to learn to halt as quickly as possible from your seat. So it would be an immediate thing. And again, if you were collecting the horse, like we were watching Hans Heinrich yesterday, it was close, release, close, release, close, release. So it would be quick, but release, quick, but release, quick, but release. So it's very seldom you're trying to do a progressive transition like that, because all they tend to do then is dribble forward into the transition. If you're doing trot walk, then yes, it would be more progressive, because you don't want to do it too abruptly. You're going to get trot halt. So that's about the only time you would do a more progressive closing of the seat. If you want to do, from trot through to walk, you don't want to do it abruptly or you'll get trot halt, so it's a slightly longer, slower closing. It depends on the horse. Some horses are incredibly sensitive to the seat, and others you've got to use a bit more. So, again, it's all about timing and feel. And always start off with less and increase to more, if necessary, particularly if you're on a horse that particularly you don't know. And just, you have to play around. This is where feel and timing all come into it. So, okay, is that all? I think that's fine.